In this session, we will use our corridor model to define some surface triangulation. We'll create an overall top surface and datum surface for this model. Now, before we can create any surfaces, we have to daylight our model to the existing ground. I've not done that yet. Let me come over to the assembly. You can see that we've left off with the sidewalk subassembly part. To daylight this, I'm going to click on the stack here and I'll go to the daylight tab. And we're going to just use the FDOT simple daylight. Let me choose that subassembly part and I will snap that to the outside on the left and right. Just for a second, we'll select this. We'll go to the properties palette and I'll drag this down. You can see that's exactly what it is. Simple daylighting. It's just 4-to-1 slope, whether we're in a cut or fill situation. That being said, if you were looking for more complex daylighting, we can always look at the Civil 3D stock subassemblies. Let me just right click on this palette. I'll go to Civil Imperial Subassemblies, and then on the Daylight tab here, you can see there are many options for benches and berms, basins, different types of things that you can do in cut and fill situations. Just for a second, I'm going to select Daylight Standard. Let's right click and we'll take a look at the help that's associated with this. Okay, same documentation rules apply. You can select any of these. Here we've got in a fill situation. If the slope is steep enough, it'll automatically add a guardrail. So just lots of things that you can do. Feel free to experiment with these when you get a chance. So we've added a simple daylight. Let me come back over to the corridor. And then I'm going to select this and we'll come up and choose rebuild. And when I do, we are going to see lots and lots of errors. Why? Because we said that we wanted to daylight to a surface, but we never told Civil 3D what surface we wanted to daylight to. Now I bring this up just to show you that, as you're working on a corridor model, you may get the events viewer showing that you've got some problems. I just want to show you how we can read this. If we look down the list, you can see there's lots of things here. But right here, parameter not found, surface target is required. Note that it found this twice at every assembly insertion. So having a problem on the left and right side probably, which stands to reason. We added a daylight item to the left and right. If you double click on one of these, let me just drag this over. You can see sometimes it's hard to read the whole thing. You may think you have to stretch that out a mile. You don't have to. If you double click on one of these entries, you'll get a dialog box that kind of lists these with some carriage returns. So we can work our way down and try and identify what the problem is. Right here we can see source simple daylight. So let me clear these errors. That's another good thing to do. Go to the action menu and choose clear all events. That's because by default any new items will appear at the bottom of the list. You can see they're all timed. If you don't clear this list periodically, the panorama may come up or this event viewer may come up just to mention something, and you may think, oh geez, I've got a bunch of errors, and you may be looking at data that's hours old. So let me clear all events. I'll click the green check to close the panorama. Let's adjust our targets. I'm going to select the corridor, and I'm going to go to corridor properties, and then got a great big button right here, set all targets. Let me click that. Here we can see all of the components that are in our assembly. Just for a second, since we're talking about targeting, you can target three things with your corridor. You can target a surface, you can target a width or an alignment, you could target a slope or elevation, which would be like a profile or a three-dimensional object with elevation. Let me expand surfaces. Here's the two FDOT daylight parts that I added, one on the left and one on the right. And you can see right now they don't know where they're supposed to target. So I can click these individually and then select a surface in the drawing. In this case, I just have the EG option. Or if we had a whole mess of these, a whole bunch of surface targets, I could choose click here to set all. This option only applies to surface targets. And from here I could select my existing ground surface and click OK, and it will apply them to all. Let me come down and click OK. I'll click OK. We'll rebuild the corridor. There we go. We can now see those connections, daylighting to the existing ground surface. Let me select the corridor again. We'll go back to Object Viewer. We'll view this in 3D and take a look. I'm going to hold my left mouse button to orbit this around. Let's zoom in. So here we can see that where we're in the cut area. And as I transition around here, I can see where we are in the fill area. Let's close this. I'll press escape and we'll back up. Let's create a surface now. I'm going to create a top surface that runs from daylight to daylight. I'll do that by selecting the corridor model, and I'll go to corridor properties. From here, I'm going to choose the surfaces tab. Here's where we can build a surface. I'm going to click to create a new surface. Here's where I can give it a name. We'll call it First Street Surface Top. I will then assign a style. For right now, I'm going to choose just something that shows up nice on screen. I'll choose triangles 1, 1 existing green, and I'll click OK. At this point, I've got a surface. This surface has been built. This surface will show up on the Prospector tab with all the other surfaces. The one thing I don't have yet is data. The surface doesn't know what to triangulate to. That's what these menus above are for. I can say right here I want to triangulate to links, and I want to triangulate to any link that includes a top code. Let me click Add to add that data to my surface. I'm going to add those links as break lines. This will ensure the triangulation does not cross the links. I will then come down and click OK. We'll rebuild the corridor. Let me press escape. Now, this isn't bad, but you can see I've got some triangulation going on out here that I don't need. This surface could really use a boundary. Fortunately, we can assign one of those as well. Let me zoom in, and I'm going to select my corridor model. We'll grab one of these feature lines. I'll go back to corridor properties. So here on the surfaces tab, this is where I built my surface. I'm going to go to the next tab over for boundaries. Here we can see the surface that I made, First Street Top. I'm just going to right click, and I'll choose corridor extents as outer boundary. I'll click OK, rebuild, and that prevents it from triangulating outside the boundary of the corridor model. So this looks good. Just for a second, I'm going to select the surface. I'll just grab one of these triangulation lines. We'll come up and choose Object Viewer, and we'll tip this up and take a look. Here we can see that we've got nice definition on the curb and gutter. I've got a nice slope here. Now the sidewalk's got the same slope as the inside and outside boulevard, so we won't see the sidewalk here. And here I can see nice transitions, nice daylighting in my cut and fill areas. So that works well. Let me close this. Let's create a datum surface now, one that represents the bottom, what we would have to grade to build this design. First, I'm going to hide this surface. I'll do it by selecting it. I'll go to the Properties palette. We'll change its style here to No Display. Okay, let's make another surface. I'll select the corridor, and I'll go to Corridor Properties. I'm going to go to the Surfaces tab. Let's build another surface. I'm going to call this First Street Datum. Let's choose a style. Once again, I'm going to choose triangles 1, 1 existing green. I would like to triangulate to links. I'm going to triangulate to any link that includes a datum code. This would represent all the links that wrap around the bottom. Let me add that. I'd like to add those as break lines, and then based on what we know now, let's go to boundaries, and I'll right click on that surface I just made, and I'll say corridor extents as outer boundary. Let's click OK. We'll rebuild the corridor. There we go. Let's take a look at this one. I'm going to select the surface, and we'll go to Object Viewer. And at first glance, this one doesn't look quite as nice as the last one. In fact, it's kind of taking on the appearance of a crumpled sheet of paper. That's not what I would be expecting here. I would be expecting to see the depression under the sidewalk, the depression under the curb and gutter. Something just appears to be wrong here. Let me show you how we can correct this. Because the first time you build one of these, just like the first time I built one, I saw this. Let me show you how we can make the correction. I'll close this, and we're going to go back into the corridor properties. Let me select this. I'll go to corridor properties. We'll go to surfaces. Right here, if I select my surface, you can see overhang correction. Right now this is set to none. I want to set this to bottom links. This will cause the triangulation to wrap around the bottom of my corridor properly. This takes care of if you have any vertical faces. Just for a second, let me leave that set to none, if you'll indulge me here for just a minute. Let's go to the section editor. I'm going to select my corridor model here, and my surface is on top. Let's see. Hit the surface again. I'm going to push the surface to the back. I'll just select it. I'll right click and I'll choose display order, send to back. There we go. Now I can hit my corridor, and I'm going to go to section editor. And if I zoom in here, we can see that surface. We can see how it connected the dots. And let me lock my view. As I step through this here, you can see it's not connecting that like it should. Okay, this is another way you can check your triangulation. If something looks unusual, pull it up in the section editor. You can see your surfaces here as well. Let's close this. Okay, now to make the correction. We'll go to the corridor model, corridor properties, and then in my datum surface, I'm going to say overhang correction, bottom links. Let's click OK. You can see the triangulation looks much better now. Let me select the surface, and I'm going to go to Object Viewer. We'll tip this up into 3D. That looks a lot better. Okay, so there's my datum surface. Knowing what we know now, let me select the surface, and we'll go to corridor properties. Let's set top links for the top surface as well. Okay, couldn't hurt. Our triangulation was pretty good already. I don't think we had any problems, but it doesn't hurt to be on the safe side. So at this point, we have now created a top surface and a datum surface for our corridor model. In our next session, we will simulate a lane widening. This will give us an opportunity to experiment with another target type. That would be the horizontal offset target.